Today is Tuesday, July 5th, 2022. My name is Hannah San. I'm here with Mr. David Kwong for the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. Hello, Mr. Kwong.
Hi, Hannah. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Hanging in there.
So to begin your oral history interview, I have a few questions about your early life, starting with when and where were you born?
So I was born here in Houston. I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital. Did you ask when, did you say? Yeah, August 1960. And my parents had moved to Houston in, I believe, 1951.
Wonderful, thank you. And how would you describe the household you grew up in terms of family members, birth order, perhaps the language you grew up speaking, or the environment in general?
So both my parents, their area of origin was from the Guangdong region of China. My mom was born in the States, and so she was American educated, having grown up in Georgia. My dad was born overseas in China and had immigrated to the US in 1937, 38, somewhere around there. And so both of them were very English fluent, but we did speak some Chinese at home. I think that I know I spoke a lot more Chinese before starting school and before starting kindergarten. And the dialect we spoke was Huiping, which is more of a village, rural dialect of Cantonese, probably. I'm the youngest of 5 children. My siblings, my oldest sibling is 12 years older than I am. And then I have a sister that's 10 years older than I am. And another sister that's 8 years older than I am, and a brother that's 4 years older than I am. And my brother and I, my brother Rick, the one that's 4 years older than I am, we share the same birthday, even though we're 4 years apart. We lived behind my family's grocery store. The house is attached to it's all one building. It was on the southeast or east side of Houston, over in very close to the Ship Channel, like 4 blocks from the Ship Channel. It was primarily a working class surrounding neighborhood. I would not say majority Hispanic at the time. It was probably white and Hispanic mostly. There was a couple of other Asian grocery stores or Chinese American owned grocery stores in the area. A couple of them related to us, and family, cousins. And it was the Asian population in general in Houston was fairly small, especially compared to today.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then the archive has previously interviewed your mother, Esther, as well as 3 of your siblings, I believe Gordon, Beverly, and Rick. And they also shared extensively about the grocery store in each of their interviews. Did your parents operate the store for your entire childhood?
If we're talking childhood through high school, yes. Yeah. They sold the grocery business when I was in, I think, graduate school.
And then did you also work at the grocery store?
According to me or according to my siblings? Because my siblings would tell you I didn't, but I did. I was the youngest. So, yeah, you couldn't get picked on about those type of things. Yeah, no, I did. And we also did, a big difference in the way I was raised and a lot of my siblings is that when I was 10, then my parents, we bought a new home about 15 minutes away from the grocery store. And so not the entirety of my childhood I didn't grow up entirely behind the grocery store. But after school every day, we would still wind up back over there to work in the evenings and until it closed.
And for about how many hours would you say that you worked after school? Did that change kind of throughout time? Was it pretty inconsistent?
I never thought about that, Hannah. So I would say, I think that we closed at like 8:30 on the weekdays. So, after school, it would be about 40 during the school year after school, and there would be like about 4.5 hours of work. And then there's still some stocking of shelves in the evenings, as well as kind of balancing the cash, the money flow for the day and the cash intake for the day. So, I guess like 4.5 hours a day during the weekdays during the school year. During the summers, you would, be there pretty much most of the day. We got to still do some social activities. I was in marching band in high school, so there was a football game one night, and I would be able to, be off from working those evenings. And then we usually they did not make the kids work on Sundays. We did work on Saturdays. Sundays we'd go off to church. The store's only open half day, and my dad and one of my uncles or cousins would help mostly run the store on those days.
Right, I see. Thank you. And then would you say you were close with your siblings growing up?
Yes, I think, I would say so. Although, again, there were big age gaps between us. And so we get along just fine. Typical brother situation of there's always a little bit of competition sporting wise. Not uncommon also older sisters having second mothers basically to kind of keep the younger ones in line. So, but I think that we were close enough to be, we definitely were friendly with each other. We socialized kind of with the same friends. And we still get along well today. But I wouldn't say that we were each other's best friends, but I think we had best friends outside of our siblings.
That makes sense. Thank you. And then I also see from our previous interviews that in addition to you having such a successful law career, your brother Gordon is an immigration lawyer. Your sister Wanda had a long career in education. Beverly co-founded the Asian American Health Coalition, which eventually turned into the Hope Clinic here in Houston. And your brother Rick is a news reporter in Hawaii. So with each sibling being so accomplished in their respective fields, is there anything you would attribute to this leadership ability? Did your parents instill a strong work ethic or particular values in your upbringing?
Yeah, and I would say, there definitely was, you had to work, and there was kind of like no question about that. So there wasn't like ever a second thought. It wasn't like we had to go find us any other jobs because we knew we already had one. They would let me pick up other jobs sometimes though when I was growing up. I don't know if my siblings had as much of a choice to get to do those type of things. When I was in high school, I got to like be the stadium announcer at the high school football field and run the clock or something like that. So they would let us do little side hustles, I guess is what you'd say, right? And but probably that work thing was so kind of ingrained. Our folks obviously worked hard. Definitely were reminded of that there were sacrifices that were made for us. Education there was a big premium on. The one thing I think that's kind of unusual about the five of us is for that time in just kind of the development of the Asian American population in Houston and nationally, that we all wound up in fields where our verbal skills were really important. And there was definitely not an incentive on that from either our parents or from the cultural surroundings or what the expectations were for what an Asian American could do at that time. And I don't know how that happened, but somehow it did.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And then you started to talk about the neighborhood you grew up in and some of the schools that you went to. Could you talk a little bit more about what it was like to be an Asian American student in your childhood and then just generally childhood memories going to school in that area?
Yeah. So, so the elementary schools that I went to were There's a school called Briscoe Elementary, which is over in the Magnolia Park area. And then when we moved, then I was still in elementary. And at that time, elementary school went all the way through 6th grade. And I went to a school called Lewis Elementary School, which is over by Hobby Airport. For junior high school, what they called it then was Hartman. And then I went to Milby High School, which is over on Broadway, again, kind of near the Ship Channel area. So all 5 of us went to Milby, but we went to different junior highs and elementary schools because of just where we were neighborhood-wise and stuff. Some of us had some overlappings. It was, I don't remember, but a handful of Asian kids being in Briscoe or at Lewis. Again, probably, I would say racial demographics, more likely Caucasian, Hispanic, pretty close, a few Black kids. In the 70s, then with everything going on with regards to the end of the Vietnam War, there were some early Vietnamese immigrants that were coming over about the mid 70s. And so I remember some new immigrants coming into high school at that time. It was also an area that was going through a lot of transition geographically. There was a little bit of white flight that was going on. And so I remember that there was an increasing Black population at Hartman, at middle school. And even, I think by the time I was at Milby, it was probably, by the time I graduated, it was pretty evenly divided, Black, brown, and white, and with a smattering of Asians, less than 5% for sure.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say how that make you feel? Was that part of the question?
Sure, if you'd like to share.
You always felt different. You always felt like you, both good and bad. You could kind of benefit from some of the positive Asian stereotypes because they expected certain things from you, or they gave you more grace maybe because you're an Asian. And so that was kind of good. I didn't get bullied as much because there was an assumption that I knew martial arts, so that was great. But it also always felt socially a little bit disconnected, and definitely my parents were kind of more encouraging of our social friendships being in an Asian community, and that usually took the form of our church that we went to.
Did you go to the same church from birth pretty much? Did you go to church your whole life?
Yeah, Chinese Baptist Church. So, and that when I was young, it was downtown, and then it moved over to the Spring Branch area when I was about in probably early teens or so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And then do you have any other just general favorite childhood memories that you can think of that you would want to share?
So, one of the benefits about being the youngest kid is that I did get, because we've relocated neighborhoods, I was the only one that got to play Little League. And so that was a lot of fun. And it was I was very happy about getting to play Little League baseball, organized baseball when I was a kid. I think that, being a dad now, I think about how different of a relationship I had with my parents and what I think I have my relationship with my own child. It's just a different dynamic, but I think generationally, culturally, things like that. Even though my mom was American born, she was still, she's very culturally Chinese, I think, in many of her values. And so I love them, but it's a very different type of relationship. So.
Right. Okay, so moving on to your college life and your education, how did you decide to attend UT Austin, and how was your time there as an undergraduate?
Okay, so my parents were dying for one of their children to go to Rice, and I was the last hope. And I got in, and I didn't go, which has always been a big disappointment to my parents ever since then. My mom pulled out my admission acceptance letter like 2 years ago. Like that was like 40 years ago. I'm like, you're still holding on to this letter. Amazing. Anyway, to once again remind me that I didn't go to the school that my parents really wanted me to go to. So it's kind of a weird story, Hannah. Honestly, one of the big driving factors about why I wanted to go to UT was socially. I had some friends going up there. I also had more limitations on who my parents would allow me to date if I stayed in Houston. And I didn't want those restrictions, and so I went to UT. So dumb.
No, but I definitely appreciate that, having recently faced those type of college decisions. And so with that, how was kind of living away from home for the first time, I assume?
Yeah, it was, it was very fun. It was, it's very freeing, and it was, I can stay out till 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's, so we definitely did. And so it was despite what I just said about socially, I was still hanging very much, my, smaller group of friends were mostly Chinese American, like kids who I'd known from Houston or met because they were either relatives from San Antonio and their friends, or that there had been some inter-church type of grouping or a Christian fellowship type thing that was Asian, and that was so. But eventually, I also was able to kind of work into the general population as far as my social circles.
Right, I see. And then thinking back to that time in college, were there any defining moments that you can remember, perhaps academically or thinking about your career path?
Yeah. So I'd say so I started out as an accounting major, mostly because that was something that my parents had kind of directed me towards, and I liked numbers, and didn't really think I wanted to pursue a hard science field, and so I was starting accounting major for the year and a half. My sophomore year, I became a resident advisor at my dorm, and one of my suite mates was a history major, pre-law, and I think that even as a business major, I thought I probably was going to go to law school at some point. And so he was a big pusher of humanities education. And so he was like, just take a history class, tell me you don't like it, and see it. And after taking a really great history class, then a really excellent professor, I was like, okay, I really want to switch over and be a liberal arts major. And so having to tell my parents that I was not going to get a business degree, and I was going to get a liberal arts degree instead, with the promise that I would get a law school, was one kind of big point of just setting my own course, I think.
Right, definitely. And were there a lot of other Asian American students studying the same thing as you at the time?
No, not many. There were not a lot of humanities students, Asian American humanities students. Mostly there were business, engineering, science, pharmacy. I don't recall seeing too many other. In fact, I don't remember having any in any of my classes.
Right, absolutely. And then I saw that you received your master's and eventually your law degree at UT as well. What drew you to eventually study public affairs, and then just generally, how was that experience?
So By that point in my life, and my brother Gordon was already a licensed attorney, and began to get involved in local politics, and I had always kind of had a little bit of an interest in government, governmental affairs, more on a policy level. So even with going into law, I had been thinking that I was probably mostly going to be on, that would have been to be supportive of a life in public policy, and as opposed to in private practice. And so there was, the LBJ school was recruiting minority students. I went to a reception. They seemed very interested, and I did not get into UT Law in my first shot. And so I decided to go to get my master's first. And then when I wound up going for law school, then it turned out the best value for my money was staying at UT for my law degree.
I see, thank you. And then in terms of public policy, were there any, whether local events or statewide national events, that kind of influenced that decision at the time?
So, earlier you'd asked me some things about things in my childhood that might have shaped me. And I will say that my parents were very involved with the community, more from a standpoint of being within the Asian American community and kind of leadership within that group, but also to kind of try to present to the larger population, the larger community. I believe that the Vincent Chin case happened around the time that I was also, it was 83, I think, 81 or 83. I remember that being pretty shocking. So there was a little bit also just kind of waking the Asian conscious kind of time overall. Gordon was definitely a big factor in just kind of, putting it in my ear. It seemed like it was a subject that I really connected with him on a lot, is because we had this common interest there. And then it turned out that I wound up rooming with someone who also wound up running a presidential campaign later on. And so he obviously had a lot of interest in public policy. And so we talked a lot about it there too.
I see, thank you. And then shifting a little bit more towards your career, in terms of deciding to specialize in labor and employment law, I wanted to ask if that choice had to do anything with your family background, with your parents being business owners and perhaps seeing them work with hiring out employees or just general business dealings, or if there were any other encounters, mentors in your life that influenced you towards labor and employment law.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't start out doing labor and employment law. Like I said, at first I thought I was going to go more policy route, and then wound up working for a couple of judges and thinking, well, maybe I will wind up in private practice. I knew I didn't want to become an immigration attorney just because that was what my brother did, and I didn't want to follow his footsteps there. And it felt like I never, unfortunately, I don't know why, but I think that a lot of my early decisions were often to push against the Asian stereotype. And so at the time, unfortunately, a lot of the Asian attorneys I knew before me were mostly immigration attorneys. So that was, again, I didn't want to just be another Asian immigration attorney. Nothing wrong with the field. It's a great field. Respect those people. They do it. It's a hard job, but it just wasn't for me. And so I wound up in a different kind of more business area, and I didn't really enjoy it. I will say that my brother suggested labor and employment, which I tried to ignore for a couple of years. And then I eventually wound up in a position where I got to do a little bit of it, and I found out I really liked it. Because it's very personal, and it's very I mean, it's a very personal interaction on both sides of the docket, and as well as I think that the issues that you deal with in employment law it's the front line of where a lot of social change happens. And so you get a little bit of an early taste of where social issues are going.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
If I'm talking too much, Hannah, please tell me just to cut my answers down. So
no, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. And then circling back a little bit to talking about you practicing in other fields and other jobs you had before becoming an employment attorney. You mentioned working for judges, and you also served as an associate judge for the City of Houston Municipal Courts in between your law practice. I believe
it was like I was doing it at the same time as I was practicing law. You're
wow.
like a part-time municipal court judge doing night courts and evening courts.
So with that, could you talk about a little bit what it was like to juggle both of those, and then also kind of just valuable experiences you had serving the courts, and whether any of that later informed your practice in employment and labor?
Yeah. I would say the first judicial clerkship I had out of law school up in Texarkana, working for the Texas Court of Appeals. It was just the best offer I got out of law school, and it would be a good experience for building on. So, and it would be something good to have on my resume for future job search in the future of my career. So, so that was accepting that job. One of the things I think that it was contributed to was an appreciation for seeing that judges were human, and that they were, kind of getting an idea about what goes on behind outside the courtroom, the thought process, that I felt like I could hang with that, which was a bit of a confidence builder of realizing that you could analyze along with what was being presented. And as a clerk, you usually help draft the opinion and the rulings. And so, not only did you get to build some confidence and knowing that you could analyze along with the attorneys, but also that you actually got to help craft what the ultimate decision was. And so that was very helpful. I worked for the city attorney for a gap year, and then I wound up working for a federal district court judge in Los Angeles. Again, fortunately, it was honestly through a family connection. Judge Liu, who is now in senior status out there, he had married a woman who was from Houston. So we'd happened to know their families, and that's how I got introduced to Judge Liu. And he was nice enough to offer me a clerkship opportunity. And I'd always wanted to move to California. So that was great. But similarly to the appellate court was just, again, being able to see and analyze and build off of that. And honestly, I think that was probably a more challenging experience out in Los Angeles than the one in Texarkana. Working as a municipal court judge, actually Judge Liu had also done the same thing. And so it was kind of fun to have kind of followed some of that path with him. And it was part of a community service thing, for one. It was partly, I also went to make sure that there was good representation of the Asian community on the municipal court bench, and there was an opportunity for it. And it was, what I liked about being a municipal court judge was that as lawyers, you get siloed off from really what the real community is a lot of times, and everyone gets traffic tickets. And so you get to see the real Houston when you got to do your docket call and do arraignment and things like that. So that was a lot of fun. But it was tiring, and I would work during the day, and then as an associate judge, a part-time judge, then you would work from like 4 to 11, and still have a lot of administrative duties. A lot of times not getting home till after like 1 o'clock or so, and it was just too much after a while.
I see, thank you. And then on the subject of you working in Los Angeles and California, were there any differences you noticed in terms of working at, even with the different levels of courts, the federal court versus cities, and then just like within law offices between the two different states or those two different areas at that time, if there's anything there that you could speak on?
Yeah, I mean, so as a history major, as well as even with my master's education, it was a lot of times focused on the Asian American experience. And so I was always curious about it, I think just because of growing up in Houston, kind of feeling different, seeing my cousins who were growing up in Georgia, who really had a very, very different experience. And then kind of having met people from California and kind of thinking, God, that seems, it felt like it was a bit of an ideal in some sense. You kind of, when you grow up in a sparsely Asian population, you're thinking, wow, that would be so cool if there were like all these Asian American people around. So go to California, and it was odd. It was a really different feel, and you realized how Houston could be very tight, close community in many ways. And so trying to rebuild connections to a community out in California was very different. Again, the Asian American bar definitely in Houston was growing, but it was still not very big. And in Los Angeles, it was, much just the way that their community has developed. It's usually a few years in developmental, or it's more matured, I guess you'd say. So they've been the idea of them being more involved in the law, in the legal system, having judges with mostly still East Asian, not a lot of South Asian folks there yet. And just feeling really like a bit of a small fish in a big pond there in Los Angeles. So I enjoyed my time out there and met my wife out there, so that's really good. But yeah, it never felt fully at home, and there was definitely a different vibe in California than Texas, just in the way people interacted with people.
I see, thank you. And then this might be a little bit of a jump from speaking about your career, and we will come back to that. But could you talk a little bit about how you met your wife out in LA?
So my wife and I met, so my wife's background is that her mother's Caucasian, her father's Chinese American. We met at a multi-church conference. A bunch of smaller Asian churches in the Southern California region got together for a young adult conference. And she will want me to point out that she's much younger than I am. So she was still in college and I was already in my career. And we were on the planning committee, and we just got to be friends over the course of that year. And yeah, I guess we fell in love. So
that's so great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so how did you come to eventually start your own law office?
I was in private practice working at different firms. It's a very stressful life. It's a business, and so there are building requirements and deadlines to meet. And we became parents in 2000, and I really wanted to have a really good relationship with my son and be a part of his upbringing. And we kind of, when my wife and I kind of sat down and late 2004, and we're like, okay, so what do we really want to do? And I think that it seemed feasible to be able to continue practicing with greater flexibility and yet to meet whatever goals we needed financially to raise a family and still be, have the chance to coach Nate when he was in Little League. So that was kind of the deal. We were co-parenting was a big deal for us.
I see, thank you. And then could you describe some areas of labor and employment law that you specialize in, or if there are any cases you were very proud to have worked on that you would be willing to share about?
Sure. So most of my early life is late in labor and employment was just defending on the employer management side of things. So that would involve, and the type of issues were mostly things like discrimination, harassment, retaliation, wage and hour or leave issues. You wind up not just in litigation, but also in counseling, advising managers and human resources departments and things like that through issues where they're concerned about possible legal implications. So a lot of laws to kind of be familiar with. You're dealing with both federal and state. It used to be mostly a federal court practice or federal jurisdiction practice, but there's been a movement to expand it on state jurisdictional use. So you wind up in both having to deal with both sets of laws as well as both sets of courts. Since I went out on my own, part of it also was a desire to represent individuals who had claims against their employers or who were facing difficult situations at work. And so I started representing on both sides of the document.
Okay, thank you so much. And kind of with going to representing both sides and representing more individuals, you talked a little bit earlier about how labor and employment law is so personal, and it's kind of the front lines of where you start to see like social change happen. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and whether you've had more insight or different types of insight into that, having now been on both sides of the docket?
Yeah. Thinking through how best to talk about through that. So with regards to social change and interaction, a couple of examples would be like the Me Too movement and the understanding and better acceptance of the idea that there can be microaggressions that can create hostility in the workplace or a hostile work environment, as opposed to just overtly racist things, which people, over time, folks generally knew enough not to be blatantly racist, but there would be little ways that it could still be communicated. So kind of watching some of that change. I think that the issues with regards to sexual orientation now, again, kind of first along the education and employment fields is where some of those issues first get worked out before a general social acceptance or development or attitudes happens. Likewise, we're kind of seeing a little bit of the backlash, I think, again, about some of those things as well. And, kind of a discounting of certain things that, from my perception, that we made some progress on socially. So that's kind of where I would say with regards to social change and attitudes within interactions. Personal, so even on a managerial side, the number of my employers are smaller companies who are moving into becoming larger and having to develop more formalities. They started off as a bit of a family business with some of their close friends or people who they felt like were more like them, and this is who we are, and not ever thinking they're going to have to start being more formalized with regards to how they're going to discipline or how they're going to address certain performance issues or how we're going to have even policies written down. And so kind of walking them through sensitively, and maybe that's where it helps to come from a family-owned business. My wife has been a small business owner herself, so I think there's understanding some of her concerns and how some of the issues that she has to deal with. So on that level, personal, and then also on the plaintiff side, I was just thinking about how there was this one older executive who, had been wrongfully terminated, and had thought this was going to be his last job, and he had convinced his wife to relocate, and then he got wrongfully terminated, trying to get him a good resolution. And just knowing how much fear he had about his future and whether he was going to be as someone over 60, whether he was going to have any other opportunities and whether he was going to be able to get any type of resolution from the employer that had treated him poorly. For him to be in tears a couple of times is, just kind of one of those type of things. So.
Right. That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And then whether in non-discrimination litigation or otherwise, how often do you handle cases for Asian American clients, would you say?
That's interesting. So I would say that I've been asked to advise a lot of Asian American, mostly on the individual side. Some business owners as well, but oftentimes it has been I feel like there's been more opportunities on the individual sides. A lot of times it's just understanding what their rights are and what process they need to go through. I think that it's changing, but in general, when you're talking to Asians on the managerial side, we're talking about probably more recent immigrants who are also smaller businesses or more early entrepreneurship. And so taking measures proactively to avoid exposure to liability is not necessarily a priority. And it's definitely an unwanted cost for a lot of very entrepreneurial people. So that I think that's why it's more difficult to kind of develop, again, it's very generalizing, but on an Asian American business side of things. It's awkward to me also, I think sometimes with regards to if it's a Asian American claiming racial discrimination, if it's something that needs to be pursued to litigation, I honestly think sometimes it's better for it not to be me that's representing them, because the jury needs to see that someone outside the community sees the discrimination they may have faced. And so that I think it comes across more credibly as opposed to another Asian person representing them, where they would just go, well, to Asians, that's what it looks like, but really they weren't being discriminated against. So I've had to, it's been mostly, sometimes it's not, I'm not the right person to do it. It's someone else. They need to have someone else showing that it is a social problem larger than just the Asian community.
With that, in your experience, have you found that Asian Americans in employment-related disputes are more likely to either not seek out legal counsel or legal action, or to gravitate more towards like co-ethnics like you Asian American lawyers?
Yeah, I think that there is something built into our culture, into our cultural values, that that has a problem that really makes us more hesitant to seek to but I think there's this concern that we're going to sound like we're complaining, that we don't want to be the squeaky wheel. I think for many of us, we are told, just put your head down and keep working, and eventually your hard work will be rewarded, which isn't really true, but that's, I think, a value that's perpetuated often within the Asian cultures. So yeah, the part of it is just not a desire to assert your rights. So on that side of things, yeah, on the defense side of things, like I said, I think it's not until the problem is right in there, it is in the face, like a lawsuit being served on them or Department of Labor auditing an employer or something like that, that they'll go, oh, okay, now we need to bring in an attorney.
I see, absolutely. Would you say that anti-Asian sentiment in recent years has impacted your representation for Asian Americans at all, or otherwise maybe brought issues that you've been seeing just more into public consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, definitely very glad to see a more organized and more well thought out and assertive campaign against the anti-Asian hate that has happened in the last couple of years. I think that for a lot of Asian Americans, we still don't believe that didn't think that would really ever happen, that it was going to happen to other minority groups or ethnic groups, but not us, sadly. So, I definitely think there's been more awareness of that. I've had non-Asian business associates reach out to me and say, how do I show empathy in alliance with some of my Asian American colleagues, but I don't want to come across as possibly say the wrong thing and I'm not going to get in trouble with HR. And so I think that it's definitely been a greater consciousness in the larger community. But I think that we're still probably the group that is generally thought of as, or is there's going to be more question about whether we really have anything to complain about. So.
Right, I see. And then I know you discussed a little bit earlier about not seeing not many other Asian peers in school studying the humanities and such. Do you encounter many other Asian or Asian American colleagues in your field now? Have you seen that change at all throughout the course of your career?
That's a great question, Hannah, because what's funny is there's definitely a much larger presence of Asian Americans in law now, and in some areas that you normally would not see Asian Americans, trial lawyers, plaintiffs' attorneys that are really good, capable, high quality, and the attorneys that are wanting to pursue fields that are a little bit more quote unquote risky, may not be as prestigious in some people's mind. But interestingly, I've had this conversation with a couple of Asian American attorneys recently that there are very few Asian American employment attorneys. It's bizarre. And these are the folks that I was talking to are young attorneys, they're within the first 5 years of their career, and they're thinking about labor and employment, but they've kind of looked around the room too, and they realized, hey, there's no really Asian American employment attorneys in Houston. I don't know what it's like nationally, but it is true in the Houston community. For some reason, there hasn't been much of a move toward that area. There is kind of becoming a few more of us, but yeah, it's this relatively small group.
I see, thank you. And then how has your work been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? Have those effects changed or waned at all kind of over the course of that?
Yeah, I think that like individually, like my particular practice or just law practice in general.
If you would want to comment on both, that would be wonderful.
Um, if you ask just about any labor and employment attorney currently, they're swamped right now. And I would say that in the spring of 2020, there's a great deal of fear about whether our practices were going to survive, how they were going to survive, et cetera. I mean, just general economic uncertainty. But then when there were so many issues that came up during COVID about public health and leave policies and virtual work and whether, special allowances for paid leave for COVID, things like that, that it kind of ratcheted. Employment attorneys became much more essential. I think also that COVID has probably made everyone just a little saltier. And so people are more litigious right now because it feels like people are more likely to file a complaint or that a workplace dispute comes up. I think there's a lot of mental health issues at work right now. And probably from an employment law perspective, I think that there are a lot of decision makers for employers that may not have given the same level of respect for mental health as physical health. And we're probably all learning a little bit more about that right now. And there are going to be adjustments to that with regards to whether it be benefits or the way that we handle certain situations. But we're seeing it all play out right now, and it's just disputes. It's rougher. It's more combative.
Okay, thank you so much. To talk a little bit about your community involvement throughout your career, I see that you've served on a number of boards for Houston-based organizations, as well as advisory councils for Houston ISD. Could you share about how you came to be involved with these organizations in the local community?
Yeah, I think there was some degree of value instilled in me by my folks and modeled for me by my folks, as well as my understanding of where my faith takes me and what I'm supposed to be doing in response to the faith that I'm claiming. And so, so community service has been connected to those things. I'm not going to lie to say that I also am sure that part of this is a bit of Asian guilt and also just expectation and obligation situation and things like that too. And or that there's also not a side professional, monetary, financial benefit of always also interacting with your community and having your name known as someone who possibly may need an employment law issue addressed. And so, it's been, the organizations that I worked with, first one was community family centers, and that was very close to the neighborhood of where I'd grown up. And it was primarily a Hispanic community that was needs that were being addressed. And I guess because of where we grew up, and I think we've always felt a special connection just with the Hispanic community in general. Human trafficking issues were something they kind of came to my attention. It came up on my view somehow, at some point, and I got introduced to working with what was then called, what were we called? Houston Rescue and Restore. And then it became United Against United Against Human Trafficking. And so, and yeah, so that was with those things, education. My kid was in school and it was in HSD, and we had a very unfortunate incident with um, some kind of racial remarks that were made by the school's principal when he was in elementary school, involving a half Asian kid. And so I wound up kind of getting involved in that one and just felt like we couldn't not say anything about that one. And then it just led to kind of more involvement with the district in general.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. And then of those and any of your other kind of community involvements, which are you like still actively committed to working with? And then if there are any organizations or areas, issues that you in the future would be interested in exploring, if you could share about those.
I think COVID really did put kind of a damper on things. It just kind of freaked us all out. And I feel like it did a little bit of withdrawing from a lot of community involvement during that time. So currently I'm not serving on any boards. I had my most recent, well, it's still part of the Asian Advisory Council with HSD, but I'd also been on the Bond Oversight Committee and the district, just in the context of what's been happening with them. There's been a lot of, they've been under a lot of close scrutiny by the state education agency, as well as, and as it turns out, some of the people that we were working with on that Bond Oversight Committee were not being fully truthful and were embezzling some funds, allegedly. And so that kind of was that's pretty disappointing. Kind of makes you kind of question some of that involvement. I still believe strongly that we want good citizens, and from the Asian American community, you want good representation in all of those type of little ways to contribute back into addressing the larger society issues. So I haven't identified anything recently that I've wanted to jump into, but yeah, I'm sure that there's probably going to be something. There had been another human trafficking organization, an organization that addresses human trafficking issues, that I'd been talking to recently. And like I said, I think that I'm just in a little bit of a post-COVID shock right now. So.
Absolutely, that's very understandable. You've also been affiliated, of course, with the Houston chapter of the Asian American Bar Association of Texas. Can you speak to how that organization is important to Asian American law students and young attorneys, and the activities and accomplishments of the association while you have been a part of it?
Yeah, I think that it is, what is modeled is always going to be helpful for any young person aspiring into an area. So I think that it is really encouraging for the Asian American, that were young people, high schoolers, kids at any level who are thinking about possibly pursuing a career in law, to realize that there are others that your race isn't necessarily going to be an impediment to that, or it can definitely be overcome if there is an impediment to it. For them to be able to see a variety of different practices and areas that Asian American attorneys are doing, just so that there's not a limitation on that. Yeah, personally, as far as whether it's been a benefit, I think it's been a platform at times and an interaction with regards to feeling some camaraderie. And I've not been taking an active role in the leadership of the organization, but I've tried to contribute in different ways with regards to feeling like if I could offer something from my experience or my perspective to as a speaker or presenting of a topic or something like that. And so occasionally I've been able to do that, and I think that that's hopefully been for good. But I think I'm very, every time I go to the Asian American Bar Association Gala now, and it is such an impressive event, and I think it's really beneficial to us as the larger legal community sees the heavy presence of Asian Americans in the industry, and to recognize that it is not to be overlooked. I think that's very good.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And then to talk about more of your identity and kind of current and recent personal family life and interests, how do you identify yourself in terms of ethnicity and nationality? And then as someone who was born in the States, as a Houstonian, has this ever been a point of contemplation or even contention for you throughout your life?
How? Of course. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that definitely identify as Asian American, and it's a heavy. I recognize that in my own understanding of who I am, that's a large part of my identity. I'm a very proud native born Texan, and have had to kind of recognize maybe some of the negatives of being a native Texan. Growing up here in Houston and Texas with very strong Southern roots, I was telling someone that what's strange is that when my brother and I used to play with soldiers when we were little, then we really wanted to be the Confederate soldiers, and we wanted and the Union soldiers were the bad guys. And because we had just been so indoctrinated with the idea of our surrounding group being the ones that were in the right, and we had a lot of Texas pride, and Texas was part of the Confederacy, so we needed to be part of the Confederacy. I've had to obviously rethink a lot of that, and thank goodness I have this progressive Californian as a wife that has also kind of reminded me a lot about that too. And then also raising a son here, and he wound up going to UT, so he's very Texasy. He identifies very Texasy, and I should say so my son is from Korea. My wife and I adopted him when he was 5 months old, and so but he's obviously East Asian. He was raised in a very white world, and I think he's kind of had to come into his own about understanding who he is as an Asian American separately. It's been kind of interesting to watch that and think about. It's caused me to reflect more on how I see myself and my Asian American identity. So definitely there's a contingent of the kind of old school Texas, and trying to always, having grown up, always wanting to fit into this big old concept of what Texas is, and never feeling quite like I was going to be fully integrated into it. And then what's the vision of Texas going to be going forward? And it's clearly not going to be the same racially, culturally, perspective-wise as it used to be.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. You mentioned how you very frequently see societal issues and interactions between different people reflected in your work. And with Houston being such a vast, populous, diverse city, do you see those manifest in a way specific to Houston's character, How would you describe that experience in Houston to perhaps an outsider?
So when I moved to California back in 1989, and I was rooming with a guy that was from Southern California and a guy that was from Chicago, and their perception about Texas was they truly asked me whether tumbleweed blew through the streets of downtown Houston, and so I think that clearly there is an outside perspective of what it means to be Texas, from Texas. Houston has always been much more of a melting pot city, and it is, I think that the Los Angeles Times reported that it is the most diverse city in America now, as far as number of languages spoken and number of national origins identified by the population. And so I would not be the person I am if I had not grown up in Houston, and experienced Houston even as an adult, and to see how to deal with the interactions of different, not only races and ethnicities, but also stages of immigration and Americanization, and which I think that's kind of that additional layer of it. It's not just where you lump all the whatever ethnic group together. It's also where their immigration pattern history was and what developed it, things like that. That really you kind of can see the layers of that.
Right. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. And then, do you have any hopes for or reflections on Asian American communities kind of in this contemporary landscape, this current climate, that you'd like to share?
So I think there's always this bit of a conflict of also with regards to having an aspiration for a particular ethnic community, because it almost, if you play it out, then I guess to me it winds up meaning that there's still a continued segregation of the community, whether it be a voluntarily selected one or whether it's something that's imposed on them. So so it's tough to say. I mean, I don't think that there's, I'm as naive as to think that there won't always be some level of otherness that Asian Americans are always going to be perceived with by some people. So I guess, the idea of us being fully woven and appreciated into the fabric of the entire community, maybe that would be it. But with that would mean that eventually there would be, in my mind, probably a full disintegration of an Asian American identity, because there would have been intermarriage and multiracialism to such a degree that what does it mean to be Asian American anymore?
I see. Thank you so much. And then, would you want to share any more about your current family life, your wife and your son, some of the values you've tried to instill in your son, memorable stories, anything along those lines?
Catching me at a really weird time, Hannah, on this. We were just having, my wife and I just had this kind of deep talk about this last night, about legacy and what does it mean? Who do you really affect, and what really happens when you're gone, and how long does your memory really even make much of a difference in the end? And I think I used to view things so much more as like that you get you wanted to do something that was going to be remembered across the community for for eternity or till time ends or whatever, And I guess at this point, I'm kind of thinking, I'm hoping that I've instilled. I know that my child will miss me someday. My wife is, if I predeceived her, that she would miss me. That there can be good memories that will have affected, our kid and whatever kids he has, if he has. And so, and then I guess, the friendships, we've had relationships and the connections and those interactions that they've been positive. And that's regardless of whether it was within the context of it being a part of an Asian American community or a larger community. God, that sounds so, I don't know, sounds kind of big scaled. As far as, I will say this, I from a about reflection about my family, I'm very proud of my wife for having become for the contributions she's made to the larger community, because I think that she's done many really cool things in her work. And I think that because of her work, then the general community has had has gained benefits from that. And I think one thing maybe with regards to our child is that Nate has just graduated. He's starting on his first job. And I think we both desire for him to recognize and really make it a priority to be looking out for the good of the larger community and not just be concerned about his own career.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then finally, could you tell me about some current hobbies or interests or other aspirations kind of outside of your career that you have?
Always a big Houston sports fan. Okay. Not a big Texans fan right now, but huge Astros fan. Always be a big UT fan of just about anything. I think so much of, my hobbies and interests are usually connected relationally. So it's like I'm a fly fisherman and a golfer more because those are great ways that my son he's very interested in that. So I'll wind up hanging out with him and do things like that. I think that from an interest and kind of vision for future, I think my wife and mine's kind of vision of how we see that is to create spaces and times and experiences for people to have good conversations, to hear different perspectives, and to build some relationships that they didn't have before.
I see. Thank you so much. So that was the final question that I have for you. Is there anything you would like to add or any final remarks you'd like to?
I'm going to so hate watching this recording because I'm going to sound, whenever you watch yourself having been interviewed, it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. So I don't think I have any questions. And I'm just kind of sitting there kind of cringing at thinking about reviewing the transcripts at some point. So I'm sure I'll have questions then. Like, can we edit this?
Well, it's been so delightful to be able to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us
Thanks.
today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.